Welcome to Top of Search with Robin and Abe, where we talk about e-commerce, Amazon, and more.
Welcome to Top of Search. If you've been buried under a rock for the last 2 weeks, you might not know that tariffs have been a hot topic in the Amazon e-commerce D2C. Brandon Young there's few people on the planet that have more experience, not only doing a ton of importing and exporting, but also teaching other people how to do the same. And he had a really great workshop that he did on tariffs, and I thought it was really, really well done. And so I asked him, and he was gracious enough to squeeze us in to talk a little bit about what he's telling sellers as we're trying to manage and look at what we're going to do in the future in order to keep our businesses viable. So, Brandon, do you want to give like a quick summary of why you are the amazing person and leader in our space that you are?
I don't know about all that. I think I've just been around a long time. It's kind of like Abe, like we just last, so then people think we're great, right? Like we just, gosh, we're just dinosaurs though. So yeah, I mean, we started selling 2015. We probably met you in 2016 when we started going to events for the first time. It's been a long time that we've known you and become friends. And I'd say in 2015, we were just kind of learning how to sell. FBA was a super scalable model. And I decided, okay, well, what do we send in, right? Like, it's just a matter of figuring that out. So then 2016, we decided to go into private label. And the main driver there was we had some ASINs and some brands that were getting gated. And so we had started to do we were doing 7 figures pretty early on. And then I saw the writing on the wall, like they were going to start gating more and more things. And with Jennifer being from China, I said, well, we should probably go to China. We have a pretty good advantage. Like we've got over American sellers because we got you, and over Chinese sellers because, I understand what Americans really want. That was the thesis, right? Who knows? So we decided to jump on a plane and we launched some brands, and, we've done over $75 million in sales, close to 20 million last year. And it's, the brands are still up and running. 2018, a couple of years after that, we started teaching. So we launched Seller Systems. And, we've had thousands of students come through. We have our mastermind with 800 members, a few hundred of which are doing 7 figures. And we just we have a great community. And then a few years ago, 2021, we had a gentleman join the inner circle who had a tech background, and he saw the methodology where we were taking keywords and adding formulas to kind of make sense of it all, because the raw data coming out of Helium 10's tools just wasn't good enough to make great decisions. And he said this methodology needs to be a software. So then Jennifer and I invested a couple $1 million, and we launched Data Dive. And so now we have Data Dive with 7,800 paid users and growing. And so we have all of our businesses still running, but they all kind of help each other, right? Like by selling, we still learn what works, and so we can teach. By teaching, we know what to build into the software, and we get the feedback from the students, and then the software gets better, and then our team can use the software as well. So it's a nice flywheel, but it keeps us busy.
Yeah, the fact that you've done a lot of the things is definitely a thing that separates you. Actually having sold a good amount of product is not true of a lot of people in our space, and still selling product today is also not a thing we hear from a lot of people. So having experience with product, having experience with all of the challenges sellers experience today, that really is a differentiator.
Unfortunately, we're feeling the pain that everyone's feeling, right? So we feel it, so we have to.
Maybe you can set the table and explain what has actually been happening the last 2 weeks that needs maybe a little bit different thinking to handle.
Yeah, I mean, previously, most products didn't experience a tariff. So I think a lot of people just took it for granted as well, where just paying a company to ship their goods into America, right? I mean, let's just be honest. Like you would put any cost on there, whatever the cost actually was that you were getting from the factory, with all the other elements that go into that cost on the same line item. And you're like, it cost me $11 when it leaves the factory. So my cost of goods is $11. And then that's what you would put on your paperwork. And now you're looking at it and you're saying, well, now I'm paying 154% or whatever it is on $11. It's significant, right? You're talking about an extra $15 in tariffs. So now that $11 product's costing you, $25. The reality is there are a lot of elements that make up that $11 that are not dutiable. And if you're smart about taking advantage of a few different policies that America has, and I'll choose my words carefully, then and break down the costs, then you can reduce that by 50, 60% or more, right? And so now If you take that 154% tariff and you bring it down to 75%, at least it's a lot more reasonable, and it gives you a margin over your competitors, at least those that aren't cheating.
I think one of
Yeah.
the things that I liked about the workshop that you did is you kind of were like, these are some of the things that you naturally baked in, like product
Right.
development or packaging development or things like that, that it made sense to build those. And you didn't say like pretend like it's less, because I'm hearing people say, just put a different number. Well, that can come back and backfire on you.
Right.
You kind of were like, okay, you can do these things, and then you make sure you have these invoices. So you were kind of giving a path to people to doing it in a legal way, and making sure that they're not paying more than they need to pay if things remain at the current level.
Yeah, it's 100% right. And I think that that's what typically, when you go to product development, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. There's design fees, there's molds, there's tooling, there's an expense, a big upfront cost to bring that product to market and start manufacturing it. And I think that what the factory does is they take that upfront cost and they kind of amortize it across a bunch of units. And so, they spend $10,000 to develop this new product that they're going to hand you. Believe me, that is baked into the cost, right? What you'd rather do is say, look, I'll pay your $10,000 over 2,000 units, but let's invoice that over here separately. And then let's talk about what the real cost is for those goods. And that goes for designing and writing the instructions, the packaging, designing the packaging, even the printing of the instructions can be not part of the product. Like, it's a non-dutyable expense, but it has to come from a separate factory, right? There needs to be a separate purchase made. And believe me, most of the time when you buy a product, you're not getting it printed at that same factory, right? Like the company that's putting together toiletry bags is not also, they don't also have a printer in the back to print instructions, right? They're bringing that in from a printer.
Yeah. So what piece of what we buy on Amazon actually is subject to a changed tariff?
So you do have a COG for the final product, but the elements that make up that COG are what you control with different invoices. So you have a few rules that you need to follow, right? So you have, basically the way it works is that you have to have an arm's length agreement with a separate entity, meaning it has to just be two separate entities. Now, the principle that we're talking about here that really makes all the difference is called the first sale doctrine. And what this allows you to do, and I'll give you the example of the diaper bag that I gave, in my call, which is a diaper bag is made up. It doesn't seem like it's made up of a lot of components, but the reality is it really is, right? So you've got buttons and zippers. You've got inner lining of the inside. You've got a cooler pocket inner lining. You've got a bottom plastic sheath that waterproofs it a little bit. And then you've got the handles and you've got a changing pad. That's a lot of components for what looked like it was just a bunch of material sewn together, right? And once you start to break down where your factory got all of these different things and how much they actually paid for them. So if I were to show, I can pull up and actually share my screen on this, worksheet I put together, which might help.
Are you finding that factories know about all of these strategies already, and as soon as you ask, they've got it queued up, or are you having to teach them this also?
Yeah, we're having to sit down individually with each factory because they don't know either.
I had somebody like, well, why weren't people doing this to begin with? Well, when the tariffs are much smaller, it's not as big of a piece of pie where it was worth doing this, kind of, like some of the other strategies. Now that you got the thing pulled up, I'll let you go ahead and share.
And I kind of just filled this worksheet out just to make the point, right? So what ends up happening is once you break down what the company is charging you and what they actually paid, you're going to pay on the first amount. So this is where there's a big gap. But if you go over here, you can also see some additional things that you can remove. Are these currently baked in? The question is, are these currently on the factory invoice? And if the answer is yes, then you need to remove them. You create separate invoices for them. And then the same is true for other services, the branding, the logos, the photography, the tooling, the molds, right? And so I haven't filled this fully out, but you would basically bake in additional costs here. And then at the end of it, you get this tariff calculator where it tells you what the old COGs were, what your new COGs are, what the old tariffs would have been, right, at 150, 45%. And then what
It changes
new
daily.
Yeah, exactly. That's your boy, man. I don't even want to hear it. So then, and then how much you're saving here. So 52%. So This is the exercise. You break it down. You have to sit down with your factory. Now, you see the difference between these two numbers can represent a percentage of the factory's profit, right? The reality is labor has to always be tariffed, is dutiable, and always has to be on here. And you've got this difference can really be the profit of the factory, despite the fact that profit is part of COGs generally. But, this is where they're making it up, right? And so you do have this opportunity to write. If you sit down with the factory and you have the right conversation, you're like, you know what? Let's take that top line that you were charging me, that you were making, and let's bake it into some of this resale value here, right? And that's the reality of what you can do. So you just have to have that private conversation with them, make sure your paperwork's good. There's a very specific set of rules you need to follow. One of the students actually in the inner circle followed up with this website. And, there need to be 2 genuine sales. There must be 2, the first from the manufacturer to the intermediary where you get it. Then from the intermediary to you, there's an arm's length transaction. So the first sale must be at market prices, unaffected by any special relationship between the buyer and seller. There must be a U.S. destination when they purchase those goods. So it's you as the U.S. destination. And then for the documents, you need dual invoices. You want to submit both the original manufacturer to the middleman invoice and the final invoice to you showing it. And then when you go to ship it, you have to say, hey, clearly indicate to customs at the time of entry that you're using the first sale doctrine or valuation. And then you have to keep detailed records for at least 5 years because they can try to go back and audit you for as much as 5 years, which is crazy. And that's it.
And especially if people have tooling baked in there, then that can be a pretty big cost. So even if you just had that, I feel like that could make a big difference in addition to everything else that you're talking about here.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about bringing a $20 product because it was very expensive to develop down to $5, right? It's possible to save 75%, and then you just invoice for that tooling separately.
Yeah. Does the intermediary have to be a U.S. company, or does it matter?
No, none of these have to be U.S. companies except for yours. I don't even think yours needs to. I don't think any of them have to. What does it say here? It must be intended to export to the United States. That's it. None of the 3 entities need to be based in the United States. The manufacturer, the intermediary, which is basically your factory or trading company, and then you. This is the reality. I mean, this is just one example of something you can do. There were a couple other strategies around, deferring and shipping into Canada, into a bonded warehouse, or into America into a bonded warehouse. And a bonded warehouse essentially means that it's a warehouse that's not technically in the United States, despite it being on American soil. So the tariffs have to be paid as soon as products enter the United States. If you ship it directly into a bonded warehouse, it sits there, and then it's not technically entering the United States yet until you schedule for it to be released. And then at that time, you would pay for those units. So you send out 2 pallets of goods, 1,000 units, then you pay for the 1,000 units or the 200 units at a time. And it allows you to pay the tariff of that day. Now, that can be good or bad, right? Like the way that things are going, what if they go to 300% tariffs? Then you're kicking it down the road. Now you have a much bigger bill. So you might at that time make a decision, well, I'm not even going to sell in the United States anymore. Screw that. I'm going to sell it in Canada or Mexico. If you can ship it from that bonded warehouse into Canada now, and then you would only pay if there's a tariff or a VAT from China to Canada. And then that would be different. So you never actually have to pay the American government the tax that they're charging us in that case. So bonded warehouses can be good because you're kind of kicking it down the road. It's allowing you to save that cash flow that you have a real issue with, because otherwise you got to pay for the whole container up front. It might take you 6 months to sell those goods, right? And no one's really in a position to take that big hit.
With the bonded warehouse, one thing I was thinking about is all of us remember COVID, and small changes in supply chain can have ripple effects for months and months and months. One thing that I was thinking about is, let's say the tariffs go off tomorrow, everybody's going to call their factory and say, get things on boats right away. And there'll be delays at the port, delays to ship. Do you think that there's an advantage to, in addition to potentially if, being able to ship things in and pay a lower tariff if that comes down, do you think that there's an advantage of being able to have access to that inventory versus maybe getting caught up in a supply chain delay further down the road?
I don't know that So, I mean, I think the only scenario that happens that you're mentioning is if a lot of people are going to hold their goods in China for now until they find out what's going to happen. So, our good friends in Australia created a company that houses goods in China and then drip feeds it in mixed containers into the US for you because it's much easier to store goods and much cheaper to store goods in China. So, it's called SKU drop. And then what a lot of people are doing is they're going to go to SKU drop and they're going to say, I'm going to hold everything there and then to see what happens, right? I'll ship it as I need it, and we'll figure out the tariffs as needed, and they just drip feed it from China that way, right? So again, it's kind of kicking it down the road. It's kind of serving the same purpose as a bonded warehouse, but when it hits the water, you're kind of setting the date there, right? If it's going into Amazon. So, and who knows, like all this is changing as to what effective date there is for what percentage and everything. No one really knows.
No, there's not any visibility into it for sure. And I think that you're right, like, figuring out a way to make sure that you have inventory as you need it. When you're looking at trying to, like, how much inventory you want to have access to stock, are you changing and expanding out that lead time for potential disruptions, or are you leaving it basically where it was before all of this started?
No, I mean, I'm leaving tomorrow morning for China. And one of the things I'm going to do is sit down with my team and have new evaluations, new criteria around supply chain and profitability, ordering quantities. I think that demand for products is just naturally going to be much lower this year because prices are going to be higher, especially in toys. You just can't get toys made anywhere else. It's really, really hard for the vast majority of them. And so the toy market's going to get crushed this year. It's going to be really tough. Christmas shopping is going to be very expensive for a lot of parents, and they're probably going to look for alternatives. So I expect demand to be significantly down if the things stay the same. And so we have to reevaluate because we're getting to that position where we're getting ready to place some orders, right?
Yeah, and not even just toys, but like that aspirational, like upper middle class products that are want products. Anything that's, there are some products that do well in recessions. But if we were to have a recession, I think that's something to take into consideration, and like where your audience is going to be, and how much discretionary income.
Yeah, you have to know your audiences and try to figure out, what can you get made where and who's your avatar, right? Like that's all part of the product development side. And then I think if the de minimis goes away, it could be really awesome for us. I think that's really, really good for Amazon sellers. I'm very bullish on that. But at the same time, like we need to be realistic as to what the economy is going to look like and how much spending power people really have. The reality is the housing market's in a huge bubble. There's an insane amount of inventory on the market in every market. Defaults, like mortgage defaults, are at the highest level they've been in the last decade. So you're looking at a perfect storm of stuff happening where cost of, you're going to have some inflation, cost of goods are going to go up, and people are already struggling. So what does that mean? They're going to spend less on things one way or another. I think a lot of businesses are going to go out of business because of this. A lot of American businesses aren't going to be able to afford to stay in business given the current environment.
The larger businesses that I work with, they've been planning for this. They have longer lead times, so they have more flexibility. They have more resources.
Right.
Whereas the
Well, that's the
smaller,
reality of
like,
it. Like
yeah,
anytime there's a hard thing like this, the people that have the money get more money and get more wealth, and the people who are struggling go out of business. And so there's a consolidation in the market that happens naturally when there's a downturn. And that's why it's been quoted by many, many very, very rich people that they love bad economies because it gives them an opportunity. Everything goes on sale.
Yeah. Is there a world in which a possible strategy is to manufacture normally, but hold the goods and drip it into the United States? You mentioned, I think it's Jamie, right? That's sending in mixed pallets of goods. But even if you're not working with him,
You can do that. You can do the same. Yeah, I mean that's the bottom line. I think you're just kicking it down the road. So whether you're going to use Jamie or you're going to store it at your factory, you can negotiate with your factory. A lot of them have storage in the back, basically, and you're just like, I'll make 2,000 units, but just ship out 400 for now, type of thing.
I feel like that's going to be one of the most viable options because it allows you to get your proper quantity pricing. It allows economic activity for the factory, which they need, and your minimum, you're feeling the smallest impact possible at each moment. So for better or worse, that's one of the actions. Now, for the people listening, and obviously for anybody who is working with us, we've mentioned sort of three things. One is dripping in inventory. One is reassessing cost of goods or how cost of goods are being processed. And of course, there is the bonded warehouses option, which is interesting because right before this show, I actually saw somebody talking about bonded warehouses, and they're saying, I've got bonded warehouse space, $20 a pallet a month. Let me know. And
It's
I'm
been a
like,
great 2 weeks for bonded warehouses.
well, the question is what happens when they get all filled up. But aside from those, are there other things a brand can do? Or is there a best thing of those three they can do?
You know, I think that it's really going to come down to what you predict is going to happen in the market. And the bonded warehouse to me is probably the best because I think you should be looking at diversifying as a brand regardless. So TikTok and Walmart and so having it in a third party warehouse here and only paying as needed to these different markets in order to move the inventory. But it's probably a blended approach where maybe you send a percentage to SKU drop, you keep a percentage at your factory, you send a percentage AGL, and then you send a percentage to the bonded warehouse, right? There's probably a perfect combination of those things that you should be doing. It's a little bit more work, but at the same time, like you're kind of hedging your bet a little bit, right?
That's kind of what we've been telling people is, trying to hedge bets and then not doing anything that's like a one-way door because things have been changing so rapidly, like making decisions that you won't regret if it stays on or if it stays off. I mean, we have to make some bets, but trying not to go too far in one extreme where you can't back out if the landscape changes.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that there's some talk of some brands that are like, well, I'm just going to send my stuff to Vietnam, have it stop there and go through. Can you talk really quickly about why things, how things have to be transformational? Something transformational has to happen to the product. We can't just pass through and then take the lower tariff.
Yeah, the exact term is like substantial transformation is what they call it. So it's basically the concept is for customs and tariff classification, country of origin labeling, trade agreements, and then there's anti-dumping that you have to be careful of too, because some countries you're not allowed to ship certain things, like mattresses, for example. Now printed goods out of China are really getting crushed by anti-dumping. Maybe it's paper goods. We have a good friend who's had to move their products. It was like 1,000% tariff added to it from anti-dumping. Basically, what they're doing is trying to protect a specific market, and they had to move their factories, otherwise they would have gone out of business. So an example of something that isn't transformational enough or not substantial is sending your raw materials to one location and it's just a simple screw, right? But if you're sending the raw materials that are then cut and sewn together and the buttons added, then that becomes significant enough or substantial enough.
You can't just take it out of one packaging and putting it in another packaging. It has to be.
No, and this is a little vague for that reason, and like they'll argue, like if they argue with you, then you're just done. Like they're just going to say no, it isn't. But it can't be as simple as just like combining three things into a box, right? There has to be, something that is assembled or modified.
Basically, you're not fooling them.
Yeah. You're not going to fool them. It's not going to happen. So let me give the example of like a luggage set, right? Like a hard shell luggage set. If I get the hard shells actually pressed in China, stacked inside of each other and shipped out, and then in those, I also get like the wheels and the linings and the zippers, and I ship all of that to Mexico. That would be enough substantial different transformation when they put it all together to where I can say made in Mexico. But if I already have the wheels put on and the lining in it, and then I just ship it and I'm just asking them to put the zipper on and put it in the box, that's not enough. So there's a line, but you've got it and you've got to walk it potentially, but at the same time you got to be super careful, right? And I would even ship them separate shipments if you have to, but it can't just be kind of just putting a sticker on a box or on a product and then put it in a box. That's not going to be substantial enough.
And, I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to move everything out of China. I know that you guys, obviously, you have a lot of relationships in China. What would you say are you looking to take your things into a different country? I think that a lot of countries like Vietnam and India already had a lot of pent up demand. Are you looking to move your production out of China?
Yeah, I think we are going to be exploring that very heavily. So like I'm already doing a project. I've got samples for a supplement here on my desk, right? I'm looking at doing things with more IP things I can protect more, and I'm looking at things that can be made outside of China. So there's a combination of all of those things.
How long do you think somebody should give themselves as a lead time if they want to move their production outside of China?
It's a minimum of 6 months, and the demand is insane right now. So like,
Yeah. I was thinking almost 9 months at this point, and maybe a year.
yeah.
Demand.
And
It's
so
it's not a quick fix. This is really a business shift.
yeah, it is. It's a really, really big business shift. And I found a factory conglomerate out of Vietnam with 11 factories, and they make toys. Like they actually, one of the few people making toys outside of China. To give you an idea, I showed them a bunch of my toys, the demand. We have a bunch of bestsellers, we have a bunch of good products. And I said, okay, which of these can you make? And then I said, okay, can we visit your factory? They're like, yeah, you can visit our factory and, we can make this stuff, but we're looking at maybe 2026. And it was like, maybe 2026. So I was like, well, thanks doesn't really do anything for me. Like, I don't even know if I'll be selling that product in 2026 with the way things are going, right? So
It's almost like you're booking capacity from now, as opposed to making a commitment with a project.
right, exactly.
I guess that's one way to look at it. So changing the product before production is not that tough, as long as the individual components or raw materials haven't been dealt with. So you basically booked space in their workflow.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned something interesting as far as the competition goes. So a lot of our competition these days is from Chinese brands, people who are manufacturing the product themselves, and there is one layer less in terms of middlemen. They've always had a price advantage, or they're using the system differently. Do you think that any of this will level the playing field in a general way for Amazon, for American sellers?
De minimis makes a huge difference, but not necessarily for Amazon, but for the competition from other marketplaces like Temu and TikTok, who now have fulfillment in America. But what they were doing is they were purposely shipping really small shipments into those warehouses from China under the $800, or at least claiming it was. So where I think that the biggest yet to be seen is going to be whether DDP is cracked down on.
For those who don't know, what is DDP?
So this is when you ship, but duties are paid as part of the logistics. So you're using a third-party logistics company, and the duties are baked into it. And what they do is these third-party logistics companies, especially those based in China, they'll give you a quote and they'll say, we will send your goods into this warehouse that you want it to be sent door to door for this price. And that's with the duties being paid. The reality is what they're doing is they're saying that on that container, there's $2,000 worth of goods, and they're cheating their asses off. Now, you're a consignee on this, but it's their bond. It's their shipping bond that they're putting at risk. But getting a new shipping bond is not that difficult. So like if they get caught, they just disappear. There's no recourse. And Amazon, or the United States government just never receives that money. What America will do, and what customs will do, is come after you, and the shit will just roll downhill until it hits you. And then you have to be like, well, I didn't know they were cheating. And that's not a good defense. Ignorance is not a good defense. So you, being based in America, have a massive disadvantage because you know that your competitors are cheating using these methods, using DDP, and then just lying about the value of the goods in the container. And if the Chinese company is caught, then they just say sorry, and you're never going to get your money, and they spin up another entity, right?
But what was happening was, it was not every shipment that was being checked. It was some percentage that made the rest of them worth doing this way. And now,
it's a very, very, very small percentage previously.
But now it's going to be essentially everything, technically.
What I think is that the use of AI and this tariff policy it should make it a lot less profitable to do this, I hope. And then what that means is that most of your competitors will not be cheating, I hope. And then it levels the playing field. But as it stands now, the policy taxes Americans, raises prices on our stuff, and hurts American businesses disproportionately. This is not something good for Americans by any means, or American businesses by any means, because it's inequitable, and it's basically, getting upset that someone is punching you in the face by hitting yourself with a hammer.
It's a challenge for sure. On one hand, the DDP is a difficulty, and the DDP is a problem that needs to be addressed. But the other side of it is, what do you actually do? There's almost, There's almost no way to win in a situation like that. The de minimis has been an issue, by the way, for far longer than Amazon. Part of my little bio is that I was selling all the way back as far as 1991. And I can tell you that that orders being shipped like that have been a challenge to me for decades. I would advertise in the back of a magazine, and there would be people taking like little classifieds to sell things at prices that were impossible, and they were just shipping them from China for less than what it cost me to ship one state over. They would sell them halfway across the planet. And we're like, we can't compete with these people. It's always been an issue.
Yeah, ePacket is just insane, was an insane disadvantage for American sellers also. And, we need to do something about it. I mean, that's where you could hurt China without hurting Americans.
Right.
Is by closing these loopholes. De minimis was a great policy to get rid of. Closing DDP. How about not even allowing or taxing China, foreign sellers? And I have a lot of Australian students and I have a lot of EU students, and they don't want to hear this. And maybe it doesn't, if they're Australian, maybe they have an exemption. But how about taxing Chinese businesses who want to do business in the United States, right? Why tax Americans, because you don't want China to win.
Listen, the idea is actually out in the world. I don't think anybody has any idea how to do it effectively. Like, one of the things that the administration said is, we want to charge people for access to our market. And by charging people, he means the business is operating in other countries. So exactly like what you described. The problem is, how do you actually do a thing like that?
Are you making any other operational changes to the way that you're planning discounting, or the way that are you like using data dive to try to identify what competitors might be dropping off as de minimis is gone, to kind of, because that's one of the things we're trying to identify, right? Is
I would only see an increased demand versus a decreased demand on Amazon, because I think de minimis was largely taken advantage of by non-FBA sellers. So I see more of a demand shifting as the prices, hopefully there's an equilibrium reached, then the demand will go to a platform that they trust, with Prime that they trust. And
I think we've talked a lot about like how to get the product here, and maybe ways to avoid the tariffs or reduce the tariffs. But there's also, if you were lucky enough to maybe have 2 to 6 months worth of inventory here already, we're working with brands on things like looking at adjusting their discounting, like looking at adjusting KPIs for advertising to make sure that we're not only maintaining stock levels for as long as we can without losing ranking, and kind of balancing those things.
Do you think that promotions and discounts are going to evaporate as people try to hold on to whatever last gasp profits they've got on this tier of manufactured goods?
I think people have slowed down trying to blow through this inventory, because this inventory, to your point, has gotten a lot more valuable, right? You think about what your replacement cost would be. You shouldn't be blowing through your inventory right now. There's a balance between trying to maintain keyword ranks and organic ranks and slow down enough to where like you're maximizing the profitability of your current sales, at least in the short term, while you're figuring out what the hell is going to actually happen.
Yeah, the person that can absorb this the longest retains the keyword advantage once everybody has settled, because they stayed at the top the longest.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? And so, we were trying to tell everyone for the last, 9 months or more, like move towards, especially with the way that the algorithms are working, the new fees for low inventory, the way that it works where your keyword ranks drop if you're low on inventory in an area. So there's geo ranking. So we were telling everyone, go to 2 to 3 months of inventory minimum, at least landed, and two minimum in Amazon, and another 2 or 3 in the United States. If you had 5 or 6 months of inventory in the United States already landed, you might be in a decent spot, because I think we're going to see I would bet that you're going to see a pullback with these percentages, maybe not to where it was, but to 75%, 50%.
I think there's also one other factor here, in which the cost of goods is technically a smaller and smaller part of the sale price. So if a $20 product costs $2, technically 100% increase is only a $2 increase, not a $20 increase. Prices don't have to go up the whole amount.
I mean, unfortunately, we get crushed so much by Amazon that we are selling it for 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 times. So
It's not like there is that room to work. It's not like that room is available anyway.
right.
But as far as what the price change will translate to, it's not a doubling of what things will sell for in the marketplace.
No, it's probably I've seen anywhere from 25 to 45% increase in sales, or in sale price. Yeah.
Yeah.
You couple that with a lot of Amazon sellers were already on the edge. They were already over leveraged. I think that there could be, like you said, a lot of people who don't make it through the other side of this.
There is a separate issue, a separate thing I'm wondering about from both of you. Are you seeing issues with buy box as sellers try to increase their prices?
We're telling them to do it at such a small increment, and you don't want to be the first one to pop up the price because then you're going to lose rank. So it has to be very small amounts.
I'm running into issues where a brand is telling me, why did we lose our buy box? And it's because they slapped 25% onto the selling price without even telling us. They just changed the price and all of a sudden the buy box is gone. Now I have to explain to them, yes, roll it back a few percentage points every few days and you watch it go. But they've got to be, a lot of people don't understand that raising the price all in one shot is going to have a really bad impact on your selling.
Yeah, and it does, especially if you lose the buy box. I mean, that's obviously massive.
And it can be worth tracking your competitor prices too, because if you can be the one that's following versus the one that's leading, if they have the inventory depth to do that, then that's ideal. And then when you can move things up incrementally, and then you can also use coupons to bring them down, to test price elasticity. Obviously, this isn't a good week to test price elasticity because it's Easter and there's some buying habits that change. Like, if you have a kosher product, then obviously this isn't a good time to test price elasticity, right? Or 2 weeks ago wasn't. So, but you want to make sure that, you're looking and seeing at what point does that price increase start to slow your velocity.
Yeah, actually, this is a really important thing. As part of the strategies for managing this, being hyper aware of the competition's prices should be very much part of the work that we're doing. When you have your top 10 competitors and you know down to the dollar what they're actually changing, you can hang on as long as possible to trail them. And each thing that you can do to get a little piece of advantage is going to be helpful.
Yeah.
I know that it is really late for you. You've been so generous with your time and you're heading to China tomorrow. So I want to be respectful of the willingness that you had to even kind of squeeze us in for this interview. If people want to follow you, we'll put a link to that tariff workshop in the show notes. But there's lots of ways that they can kind of follow you. You've got an inner circle. Did you want to share some of that information real quick?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, sellersystems.com. We've got a 2-day workshop in Paradise coming up, Camp Ecom. So campecom.com. It's going to be in Cancun in May. We have a virtual ticket available to that. What we do is we do 2 days of workshops. We have pre-launch track and a post-launch track. So product development, product validation, design, and then post-launch is the ads optimization, all the stuff Abe's great at. And then you get both sides of it. So if you want to come to Paradise and hang out for a few days and enjoy the beach and drinks and mojitos and learn, you can bring your team members to go on one side, you go to the other, but you'll get the replay on both sides, or you can just do the virtual thing. But that's kind of what we do is teach tactical strategies for, private label product development. And now it's getting great. We're looking at a lot of TikTok stuff, a lot of diversification, brand building. And then we've got Data Dive, which you tell people about regularly. So you could drop your code in and make sure people are using it. I appreciate you, Robin.
So we'll have links to all of those things that are in the show notes. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I hope you guys have enjoyed listening as we have had recording this episode. And with that, I think we're going to say goodnight.
Thanks for listening to the Top of Search podcast. Have a burning question you would like answered or a topic you would like featured in a future episode? You can submit it at topoffsearchshow.com. If you love the episode, subscribe and leave a review. Each month, we'll be selecting one reviewer to win a one-on-one call with your choice of Abe or Robin. Winners will be announced at the end of the first episode of every month.